Daily Rambam for Tuesday, Ches Kislev Tafshin Pei Aleph, the 30th Perek Shloshim of Hilchos Shabbos. So we finally have arrived at the final Perek of the very long Hilchos Shabbos. The only other halachas in the Rambam that rival Hilchos Shabbos in length are Hilchos Mechira, which also have 30 prakim. Those are the only two. And this time, as we shall see, the Perek has gotten shorter again after a series of a number of long prakim. And the subject of this Perek, this final Perek, is Kavod Shabbos and Homnick Shabbos, as we shall see. So, Halacha Aleph, the Rambam introduces Kavod and Homnick Shabbos. The Rambam says, Arba Dvarim Nemru b'Shabbos, four things were said with regards to Shabbos. Shnayim b'Torah, two are in the Torah, Shnayim in Divrei Seifrim, and two are midrabanan, v'hein mefayroshin al yedei hanavim, and they are spelled out by the Nevi'im. So note the Rambam's formulation of how he says it. It's midrabanan, spelled out by the Nevi'im. Shabbat what do we have in the Torah? Zachar v'shamar. So those two. Interestingly, I don't think the Rambam mentioned shamar yet until now in Hilchos Shabbos, but clearly. So seemingly or clearly referring to Shmira, most of the Shabbos, and Zachar we learned about yesterday. So that's those two. Mishnah is partial. They have Nevi'im, and the other two that were spelled out by the Nevi'im are Kibud ve'inug. So honoring Shabbos and enjoying, delighting in Shabbos. Shenema v'karasa l'Shabbos Homnick l'Kiddush Hashem mechubed. These words are in the middle of the pasuk that we quoted earlier in Perek Chavdaled. So it starts off in Tashmi Shabbos Raglecha, and in the middle you have Karas LaShabbos Homnick Kiddush Hashem Chubad, and then it ends off with Mimtzei Chaftzcha V'Daber Davar. So here you see both the word Homnick and the word Kavod. So those are the two things we also need to do on Shabbos, as we shall see. Halacha Beis. So now from Beis to Vav is all about Kibud. So the Rambam says Halacha Beis Ezehu Kibud.
In the other part, he quoted these psukim to prove a certain point about what's in the spirit of Shabbos.
Right. Like I said,
but over here, he's admitting to the fact that the Divrei Nevi'im and Taket's attached to Divrei Seif.
Yeah. I said note how the Rambam formulates it. Divrei Seif and Mefarish Alei Nevi'im. So Halacha Beis Ezehu Kibud. So what do we mean when we say Kibud? Zesh Amru Chachamim. This is what the sages said when they said Shemitzvah al Adam Lirchetz Panav Yad Beraglav Bechamen Be'erev Shabbos U'Perek Kveda Shabbos. There's a mitzvah for a person to wash his face, hands, and feet with hot water before Shabbos in honor of Shabbos. Umis Atef B'Tzitzis, and he wraps himself in a sheet with tzitzis. V'Yeshu B'Kavod Reish, waits with respect. Miyachal Hakbalas Pnei HaShabbos, waiting to greet Shabbos, as one would prepare to go out towards the king. And the early sages, Chazal, used to gather the Talmidim on Erev Shabbos. They would wrap themselves in the tzitzis, like we said, and they would say the following: Bayu v'neitzi the Kras Shabbos Hamach. They would actually utter it.
When he says tzitzis, he's referring to towels.
So I'm going to mention. You'll see the background of the Gemara might give a little more context to the tzitzis. So they would say, let's go and greet Shabbos the king. And in this case, the Rambam, we're more familiar with Shabbos Hamalka, and that's especially a Pi Kabbalah. But I think the Gemara also says Shabbos Hamalka, but the Rambam, for some reason, changed it to Shabbos Hamalach. Now, so the Maggid Mishnah says, what are the sources for what the Rambam writes there? So the sources are in Gemara Shabbos. It says there, the context there is actually talking about why you can't use itran. One of the things we mentioned that you can't use to light the candles, and the reason is because it has a bad smell. And shama yani chena v'yetze, you might leave it and leave the house. So until now, all the other oils or liquids, fuels, they had other problems. There's going to be a fire. There's going to be it's not going to burn well. Here it's just you're going to leave the house. So the Gemara says, the Abaya says v'yetze. Let him go. What's the problem? He said, no. The whole point is that it's Kavod Shabbos. You need to have a Suda with So the point is to be in the house, not to be driven out of the house. And then it quotes, it says that we already have the statement from Rav, Hadlakas Ner b'Shabbos Chayva, that's mamash a requirement. And Rechitzas Yadayim Raglayim B'Chamen Arvis, that's what it shows. V'ani Omer, and I say mitzvah.
Who's this?
Well, Omer of Nachum Bar of Zavda. So
from the
he's
Gemara.
quoting, and whoever quoted added Bani Omer mitzvah. So Mara says my mitzvah. So what are we saying? What are we talking about? This was the minig of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai. Out of Shabbos, they brought him big tub full of hot water. He used to wash his hands, feet, and legs. His face, hands, and legs, and he would wrap himself in his clothing. And he would sit with sheets that had tzitzis. So they're sheets, meaning they're not really meant per se to be. It's not a talus. Sheets, which was just a nice way to sort of dress indoors, but they had four corners, so you put tzitzis on the four corners, and it looked like a Malach Hashem the way he sat there with them Malach Hashem tzvayis. His Talmidim, they were hiding the corners of their clothing. He shouldn't see that they don't have tzitzis on their sedinin. They were also wearing sedinin. They didn't put tzitzis on, and they were hiding it. So he saw they were hiding it. So he told them, "My children, haven't I told you? Comes to sudden b'tzitzis, Beishamai say taka sudden is potter, and Beisil Armachayim. Now, part of the problem here is that a sudden is made out of pishtan, and the tchelas has to be out of tzamer. So there's a kalayim problem. So if it's a clear chiyuv, so then tzitzis tchelas overrides kalayim. But here with the stinin, so it's not maybe it's lavdafka to properly a bega, whatever the logic is. Look in the Rashi there, Mefarshim there. Anyway, Basil or Mechayim Lachazak Basil. So what were they thinking? They were thinking that it's Pashat Ksos Laila. It's an issue of if it's just something we're at night, and maybe you shouldn't be putting tzitzis on Ksos Laila. These are other issues, but that's the context where the tzitzis sort of comes in the Gemara. Doesn't sound from the Gemara that goes mamish dafka a chiyuv to have tzitzis per se. The chiyuv was to have nice sedinin. The sedinin happened to be mechuyev in tzitzis, but the Rambam incorporates it that they're misatif b'tzitzis, that you're wearing your nice clothing, and that includes tzitzis. And for the latter part of the halacha, the Gemara says that Chanina would be misatif, and he would stand Erev Shabbos, and he would say, "Boy v'neitz lekras Shabbos Hamalka," and Rabbi Yanai, he would put his clothing on, and he would say, "Boy kala," and that was later, many hundreds of years later. That was how the piyut of L'Chadaydi was built around these statements from the Gemara. All right, Shleima Halevi. Halacha Gimel. Yeah, Halacha Gimel. The kavod Shabbos yilbash ksos nekiya. So the part of kavod Shabbos is to wear clean clothing. What you wear on Shabbos should not be like what you wear during the week. So the concept of Shabbos clothing, but mainly lahachlif, and if you have nothing to switch to, mishal shel talisai. So then you wear the talis. So we have mentioned this before. So the idea being that you can mamish loosen the talis until it's mamish hanging down, or you pull the talis all further up. So on Shabbos, if you don't have, then you lower the talis. So at least it's different in some way. This was actually mentioned, those you remember, in Hilchos Deis, in the Perek when we spoke about a Talmid Chacham and how he's supposed to dress and comport himself in general, but specifically the part of the Perek that deals with dress. It says, it looks haughty, looks like people who are very full of themselves. But Ella b'Shabbos Vavad, mainly lahachlif, the same halacha. The Ezra tikein shihu ha'am mechabsin ba chamishi, and this is takanas Ezra to wash clothing on Thursday. Mepnei kavod haShabbos. That's part of the honor of Shabbos to wash the clothing. And when should you wash it? Wash it on Thursday. Let's look a little bit at the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe in Simon Reish Samach Beis, with regards to halacha Gimel, says that also in Sif Gimel there, that a person is mechuyev to be mishtadel, to have nice clothing for Shabbos, according to his level of visibility, because that's part of being mechabed Shabbos with clean clothing. And the Alter Rebbe quotes that in that pasuk in Yeshaya, it says, "V'chibadetoi me'asois tirachecha." The Rambam doesn't mention this, but part of the pasuk is "V'chibadetoi me'asois tirachecha." That was how they darshaned "Shelo yehei malbushcha shel Shabbos k'malbushcha shel chol," which the Rambam quoted in short over here. So that means you have to switch to something nicer. Alter Rebbe explains that malbush is called kavod. Malbush is synonymous with kavod. How do we see this? Person comes, you show up in a place where no one knows you, and you see people see you're wearing big dechamudas, you're wearing beautiful clothing, so automatically people treat you differently. You're treated with respect. So here you see that malbush is covered. And if Alter Rebbe still mentions this din that you should be mishalshal begadav, I don't know if that translates into modern day dress, but he says it's midas hashirim. Rich people that are working class, their clothing have to be off the earth. They can't drag their clothing on the earth. But someone who's rich, who stays home, so his clothing can drag on the earth. That's why Talmud Chacham shouldn't do that ordinarily. But here it's a form of kavod Shabbos to act like an usher. And Alter Rebbe says misha efshaloi, better to have another talis. And Alter Rebbe mentions yesh anshe ma'isa that are medaktik not to wear on Shabbos from anything that you wore during the weekday, even an ezer, mechnasayim, v'chalok. So even other items of clothing, best not to wear what you wore during the week. And Alter Rebbe says it's good to wear Bigdei Shabbos all day of Shabbos until after Havdalah. But he doesn't mention beyond that till after Havdalah. And then in Halacha Daled, the Rambam mentioned, Alter Rebbe mentions what we mentioned before in Halacha Beis about to greet Yetz L'Kras HaMelech, Yetz L'Kras Chasam V'Kala, and he mentions what Chazal, and the Alter Rebbe mentions that some have the minig to leave the shul and go out to the Chotzer. Kabbalah Shabbos was literally the portion of the Siddur that we now know as Kabbalah Shabbos. That was part of the minig in some places was to literally go outside to greet Shabbos. V'yesh Negen, let's say it's Hasada, to go out to the field. I believe in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, that era, I believe there was still common practice for people who followed Kabbalah to go out to the field taka. Alter Rebbe goes back to talking about the clothing. Alter Rebbe says that it's best to wear Bigdei Shabbos right after washing. So if someone goes to the mikveh, to the Beis Merchatz, sort of goes together. So you should wash oneself close to Shabbos and put on Bigdei Shabbos. And that way you could tell that it's l'kavod, taka, in honor of the Shabbos that's arriving right now. And the Negaya, the Tikkun of Ezra, so that's in simulation members. The Alter Rebbe mentions that Ezra's metakin. What's the word of Thursday dafka? Because Friday, Pashat, there isn't enough time. You're busy doing, back then, cleaning was a more labor-intensive experience.
It should be ready for Shabbos. If you do it Thursday, it dries. If you do it Friday, it's not going to get enough dryers in those days.
Right. So, well, the way the Alter Rebbe says is that you don't have time because you're busy with Tzarchei Shabbos. That's how the Alter Rebbe phrases it. But anyway, nowadays, the Pesachim nowadays, they all acknowledge that due to the transformation of washing and drying, so this Nakuda about Chamishi is not applicable. You can, as long as it works out, that you have the time and it works and it doesn't clash with the Tzarchei Shabbos, you can do it on Friday. The Iker is to have a Ksus Nakiya. Halacha Daled. Also, the Kabayas Udu Mishta B'Erev Shabbos Mipnei Kveda Shabbos. So first the Rambam says you're not allowed to make a Suda in a party on Erev Shabbos. It sounds like it's the whole day because of the honor of Shabbos. You're allowed to eat and drink without being Kveda Suda Mishta until it gets dark. Alpha became, but still Mekveda Shabbos. It's still, you should honor Shabbos from Mincha and on. You should not be Kaveh Su'udah Kiddush. You can't Shabbos Kshumis Avalachel. So you go into Shabbos and you have an appetite. Now, interestingly, that I mentioned also the Kaveh Su'udah before, and now then he says Kaveh Shabbos from being Kaveh Su'udah Min Mincha L'Mayla. So let's see. There's a discussion here in the Mefarshim about this. So first of all, when it comes to Achetechshach, I should point out just yesterday in Perek Chavtas, we learned about the halachas of what if you are being oichel b'sheis Achetechshach. The Rambam said what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to, if you want to continue reading, what you should do, if you want to bench, how you should do it with fitting in with Kiddush. But when again, this question of what you are allowed to do of Shabbos, what you're not, so the Rabbi first of all says, right in the beginning when it says, also l'kboya, it sounds like from the Rambam all day. The Rabbi says, no, daf from Chatzos. So the Maggid Mishnah explains, says, first of all, what's the background there? The background is the Gemara in Gittin. The Gemara in Gittin discusses Churban. The Gemara says that there were two mishpachos in Yerushalayim. One was Kaveh Su'udah on Erev Shabbos, and one was Kaveh Su'udah on Shabbos, and they were both completely nekru, they were uprooted, they were destroyed. So what was wrong with making the Su'udah on Shabbos? Because it was Zman Beis HaMedrash. And what was wrong with Erev Shabbos? So we see that you're not allowed to be Kaveh Su'udah on Erev Shabbos. But first explain that it looks like you're being Mezalzel b'Kaveh Shabbos, even though you're allowed to eat, even start eating, but that's just l'tzayich shah. You're a little hungry right now, but to make a
When was you said Zman Beis HaMedrash?
Yeah, we mentioned this earlier. Also, there was a concept of Zman Beis Medrash and Shabbos afternoon. You were supposed to only go to the Beis Medrash, not even learn Ksuvim, which might distract you from going to the Beis Medrash. That was in time of Chazal.
What was the purpose?
To have
You should learn.
It was like a formal time of learning.
Yeah.
Communal time of learning. So anyway, the Farshim say that you're allowed to eat. So how does it fit with this Gemara? The way those Farshim said is lasis kach tamid. You're always making a party of Shabbos. So those Farshim don't seem to be making a distinction between different types of eating. But anyway, so then he quotes the Rabbi who says, only from Chatzos. So the way that the Maggid Mishnah makes it say in the Rambam is like this. He says, from the Rambam is mashma that some kind of extraordinary feast that you don't even do during the week, that you're not allowed to do on Erev Shabbos, and that's the whole day. Because look at the Gemara in Gittin. Gemara in Gittin says they made a Suda Erev Shabbos. It doesn't say anything else. And to eat and drink without a Kviyas Suda, so then you can eat it the whole day. It's whole Shabbos, like the Rambam said. To the Kaveya Suda that you're Kaveya b'Meisach Chayil, that's the last final halach of the Rambam that you could do until Mincha v'Mayla, which the Maggid Mishnah says is Teisha Shoyes, 9 hours, because when the Rabbi says you can be Eichel V'Helech Achetachshach, he didn't mean with a Suda, without a Suda. He meant without a Suda, B'li Kaveya Suda. That's how that's the 3 statements of the Rambam. And so the Ravid saying us for the Kabbalah in Chatzos. So first of all, it doesn't hold of Chatzos, and second of all, depends what you're talking about. The regular Suda, Kviyah Suda, that's Mincha L'mayla, what the Ravid would call Chatzos. But what the Rambam was saying in the Reisha is an extraordinary Suda. That's the Gemara in Gittin. Kesef Mishnah also comments and says, note that the Maggid Mishnah said Teisha Shoyes V'Mayla, unlike the Ravid who said Chatzos V'Mayla. He says this is based on the Gemara in Pesachim. And Morris says over there, Mincha Ktana. So based on that, that's Erev Pesach. So same logic here, that that's the amount of time you can have an appetite, build up an appetite again for the night. Why is it Teisha Shoyes? Mincha Ktana is Teisha V'Chetzi. But also Erev Pesach, we had a half an hour before. Okay, halacha, hey. Setting the table. You set your whole table out of Shabbos, even if you're not going to eat more than a kazayas that night. And here the Rambam acknowledges the Seder of Matzah Shabbos a little bit. I think this is the extent of it. You should set your table Matzah Shabbos, even if you're only going to eat a kazayas. This is how you honor Shabbos both at the beginning and at the end. But the Shabbos, and you have to set up your house before Shabbos in time. The candle burning, the table set, the bed is set, bed is made. Shabbos, and it's all in honor of Shabbos. So on B'tzarech L'taken at the end, so the Maggid Mishnah is mitzayin to the Gemara, famous Gemara. First, the Gemara says that whoever davens Erev Shabbos says Vayachulu, so 2 malachim accompany him, the 2 malachim will accompany him, put their hands on his head. But then you have the famous Gemara that 2 malachim Chores accompany a person out of Shabbos from shul to his house. One is good and one is bad. When they come to the house, if they find the ner dolak, the shulchan aruch, mitzvah mitzvahs, these 3 things, then the Malach Tev says Yiratzin should be next week, and the Malach Abin Bal Karchay, famous line, or vice versa. So that's where this din comes from at the end of Halacha Hey, from that famous Gemara. Practically from Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Reish Samach Beis, but again, Erev Shabbos, the Alter Rebbe says you have to set your table out of Shabbos for the night of Shabbos, and set the beds, and set everything really. The house should look mesuder when you come home from shul. And the Alter Rebbe says the minhag is that the table is covered with a tablecloth the whole Shabbos day. Ein Lashanas, you shouldn't budge from that. It mentions there should be even 2 tablecloths, because maybe you're picking up one tablecloth to throw out the crumbs, so you have another tablecloth below that. Alter Rebbe mentions specifically that it's good to clean out the cobwebs, the spider webs, kurei kavish, from the house in time for Shabbos. Alter Rebbe mentions, and Alter Rebbe also mentions that if you're not going to sweep your house, let's say you have a shaila back then, especially with the earth, with sweeping, if you're not going to sweep your house, and you shouldn't throw garbage on the floor, which was more common then, you have to throw it on the tablecloth, and then you take the whole tablecloth, which we learned already about the graf shari'i, you can clear out the garbage, even though it's muktzah.
As far as mitzvahs, on Shabbos, you can't. We learned the other day that you're not going to make a bed.
This is talking about a mitzvah, but with the Adam.
Yeah, it's more like it's possible. Yeah.
I think it's what they used to have those.
It makes sense.
They had a light of.
Okay. The Gabi Matzah Shabbos, Alter Rebbe says in Siman Shin that La'olam Yisader Adam Shulchan B'Matzah Shabbos. You should set up your table Matzah Shabbos the way you set for a meal, even if you're not even going to eat a kazayas, either because you don't have more, or because you don't have an appetite. You should still make a hana by setting the table and spreading out a tablecloth like a real suda, because that's how you accompany the Shabbos. So that's it's important to remember, even for those who are not so makbid on the suda, but there's an union of setting the table, or I guess you could just sort of leave the table set to some extent. And Alter mentions the candles. Yesh neigim to have candles, neigim to say piyutim and zmiris, to say goodbye. And Alter also mentions a little bit about the malav milk, which Tam did not, that to cook meat or something else to cover the suda, and then
the clothing.
yeah.
What's with the clothing on Matzah Shabbos?
So we mentioned it till after Havdalah. That's what the
Yeah, but okay.
that's all we said.
What is the some people do wear?
It's definitely Makaitis is definitely more Makaitis for more from but the whole idea that till Chatzos is Shayach to Matzah Shabbos, you don't say Tachnun in Kriya Shema for those who say so there's a bit of a Shayachas till Chatzos.
Up to Chatzos.
Yeah. Then the Alter Rebbe says, it's manenu that if you have Shal Shudas and you have it late and you're not having a Matzah Shabbos, so then you can be Mekayim Beperis. Sounds like you should still have something. Most people eat something anyway, but you should be Mekayim at Beperis, and you don't have to make Shal Shudas earlier to make sure you have room for Malka. It's not, it doesn't call it that, but for this Suda, because it's not such a Chayva. And Alter Rebbe also mentions folding the talis. It's already mentioned in the Sefer Halacha about folding the talis to be Misasik B'mitzvah Miyad. Halacha Vav. Preparing, being involved. Obviously, even if you're very important and distinguished.
Made a comment on the Thomas. It's better if the man goes washes the dishes. That'll be more shalom.
Good.
Yes.
So even if he's an Adam Chashav, and he never goes shopping and he never helps out with the household chores, Shabbos is different. You have to do something for the sake of Shabbos. Personally, that's the honor of Shabbos. The early sages, Chazal, you would break the wood so it could be used for cooking. Someone cooked, salted the meat, a Gedel Psilis, wove the wicks, a Mada Kaner, so lit the candles, someone went shopping, got food and drink. Even though that wasn't their usual mode of behavior. The more, the better. Of course, my Mishnah quotes the Gemara, Rav Safra, all the names of who did what. Rav Safra roasted the head, and Rav salted the fish, and Rav Huna lit the lamps, and Rav Papa spun the wicks, and Rav Chista cut the beets, and Rabbi and Rav Yosef cut wood, and Rav Zera prepared the thin sticks for the fire, and Rav Nachman Yitzchak would load things on his shoulder and go in and out just to show that he was schlepping things for Shabbos, etc.
And we stay out of your kitchen.
Halach Zay. So now that was Kibbutz Shabbos, and now we're up to Inog Shabbos. Inog Shabbos. Halach Zayin. Ezu Inog. So how do you do that? That's making the food actually good. It should be a fat dish, a spiced drink. Everything in honor of Shabbos according to what you can afford. And the more you spend and prepare, the better. If you can't afford, if you lost a Shabbos, even if you made a simple stew in honor of Shabbos, you stewed some vegetables, that's also Einik Shabbos. So Asa is Mishum Kvoid Shabbos, and then the food itself, I guess, is Einik Shabbos. You don't have to make yourself crazy and borrow from others in order to increase the food. And this is the famous statement, phrase, I'll say Shabbat Chakoil, better your Shabbos should look more like a weekday and don't use other people's favors. What if you're so contented and wealthy and every day is like a Shabbos? What do you do? So you have to change somehow, show some difference. We have Shalashanas, and if there's no way, Shanas Manachila, so you got to change the time. If your meal is usually early, make it late. And if it's usually late, make it early. Three sodas. Here's where the Rambam mentions the three sodas. We mentioned it from Al today, but here's the Rambam. You're chayav to eat three. Achas aras, achas shachas, achas mincha, one by night, one in the morning. one in the afternoon. We also end up having the morning one more in the afternoon. You have to be careful with these three, not to have less. Even someone who's eating from tzedakah, you should still have the three, not just two or one. If it makes you sick or you're fasting for a valid reason, then you're potter. And each meal should involve wine, and 2 loaves of challah, and the same goes for Yom Tov, also 3. The Kesef Mishnah points out that the Torah comments on the Rambam that it seems like, seems from the Torah understood the Rambam to say that there should be Kiddush by Shalosh Shudas, because the Rambam wrote L'kabaya alayayim. That's how he understood it. And the Kesef Mishnah says that's not mashma from the Rambam. Just that you should drink. Is just a phrase that refers to having a formal meal with some wine. It doesn't imply that there's Kiddush involved. And he says, look in the Perek in Perek Chavtas. It said, Mitzvah Levarach Layam Yom Shabbos before the second Suda, that's Kiddush Rava. They didn't say anything there about the third. If it would have been Kiddush, then I would have mentioned it there. It's part of Zachar. Now, of course, when it comes to Shalosh Shudas, we know Chabad has a unique stance, and they have this famous Sikh of the Rebbe, look at the Sikhs, Chelek Chavalach, Beshalach, Sikh Beis. It mentions the famous vart that the 3 meals are connected, the 3 hayoms of eating hayom when it comes to the mon, and the third time it says hayom, it says hayom loy. Hayom was referring to Erev Shabbos. Hayom loy simtzu basada. You won't find the mon. You won't find the mon on Shabbos. So the drash, I think it comes from Levush and on, is that hayom loy is a remez of a negative when it comes to Shalosh Shabbos. So on one hand, we learn all 3 sudas from hayom. On the other hand, you have hayom loy. And the Rabbi did not wash, and the word is that it's me'in de la'asad lavay. La'asad lavay is going to be bechinas ayin, and that's minum is in hayom loy, and that is associated with not eating bread. That's how the Rebbe is masberet. And the question is, how does it fit with nigla? Now the Rebbe says you shouldn't be seimech on the day that you don't have to wash. There are already days and nigla. The Rebbe said not to be seimech though. So what? So the Rebbe says, explained that it's Einig Shabbos, and we said that if or whatever, it's you're aser. So if you feel the ayin, so they couldn't eat the pas, and the chassidim follow. Here the Rebbe doesn't say the vart the chassidim are also mitzvah. The Rebbe just says that we try to implement what the Rabbeim do, and that's enough.
With the Rebbe Shab, though. You're not eating of Shalosh Shudas.
Oh, the Rebbe Shab had a different seder. I think the Rebbe Shab
he imposed it on
ate for Kiddush. He ate during the Kiddush, and then he washed again. And then I think it says something that somewhere that somehow includes Shalosh Shudas, although you have to see the details. Then the Rebbe says doesn't mean that eating at Shalosh Shudas is bad. It says Yehei Chalki Merech Gimel Sudas. So it is a good thing. So L'asad lavai, Rebbe says, L'asad lavai, we're going to understand the mile of the guf. The schar is dafka neshama beguf, but just the neshama won't need the eating. So by eating a little bit, by Shalosh Shudas, bring meram is to the mile of the guf that the neshama will get the chayas from the guf. So l'maisa, we do eat something by Shalosh Shudas. Halacha Yud, the Seder of the day. So eating meat and drinking wine, that's being ma'anik Shabbos. That's if you can afford. Also, the Here's where the Beis HaMedrash hour comes in again. That you're not allowed to make a suda at that time. That was the other family that we mentioned from the Gemara. One ate at Erev Shabbos, one ate at this time. This is how the righteous, this is their schedule. Umusav of Beis HaKnesses. You daven the 2 tefillas and shul. You have the Beis HaMedrash, you come home, you eat the second meal. Beis HaMedrash, and that's the time of Beis HaMedrash. Yikav Yishma, you learn, you listen. Ada Mincha, you spell Mincha, then you daven Mincha. Then you go home and you have your 3rd meal with the wine. Yikav Yishta Mitzvah Shabbos. You don't drink till Motzei Shabbos. So the implication being that you draw it out, you're sitting, you're spending the time at the meal.
So then it's according to this cheshbon, you're eating the meal at home, you have the second meal, then you leave, you finish it, you bench, and you go back to shul to learn.
Yes, yeah, there's a stretch of time, and then you go home, and you're home for the 3rd meal. Yeah, that's the Seder.
Not in the short Shabbos, no.
Halacha Yud Aleph, and now we have a few things you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Also, you should not be traveling, be walking more than 3 parsois, which are about 7 miles from the beginning of the day. So you can reach your house with still enough time to prepare a meal for Shabbos, the assumption being that you're going to come home and start preparing. We're assuming that you're very far away and you have no way of communicating that you're on your way, so no one knows if and when. So you have to be there with enough time so you can be. No one's preparing for you. So when you come, you're gonna start preparing. And if you're going to be hosted by others, you for sure have to give them advance notice and arrive on time. You're going to embarrass them. If it's in your own house, the downside is you won't have food. If you're in someone else's house, you're putting them on the spot. They feel bad. But the Kesef Mishnah says that this is if we're telling you not to continue going, so what does that mean? You must be in a place where you're able to prepare Shabbos where you are, and it's better to stay where you are. But if you're in a place where you're not going to have Shabbos where you are, better to come home. Maybe you'll be able to prepare something rather than staying where you are and preparing nothing. And the same goes for others, even if you're being hosted by others. It's better to come a minute before Shabbos. Maybe it's going to work out than not embarrass them and not have a Shabbos. And if you're not b'makom yishuv, the Kesef Mishnah says, then for sure you're allowed to go as far as you need to go in order to get to a place on time. Of course, we know b'chalal is to avoid traveling, even not mitzad this concern, but there's a word of not traveling really in the afternoon. Halacha Yud Beis. Also, this honest was in both Yud Beis and Yud Gimel. You already were Rambam earlier in Perek Beis, as we shall see. Also, this honest was not to fast for the purpose of asking Hashem for help, cry out to Hashem, etc. on Shabbos. And even if it's a tzar, it's on the list of things that the tzibur is supposed to fast and cry about. That cannot take place on Shabbos. Unless the city is surrounded, under siege from Gentiles or by a river, or you're on a ship that's in trouble at sea. So then you call out, you scream for help, and you ask Hashem for help. So Masriyan might be asking others for help, and is from Hashem. Yud Gimel you should not begin a siege. If the Jews are waging war against the Gentiles, you should not start the siege within 3 days of Shabbos. So they should all be calm and settled by Shabbos, and they shouldn't be the opposite. For this reason, you shouldn't set sail less than 3 days before Shabbos. Overcome whatever seasickness, etc. So you're already regained your equilibrium by Shabbos. But if it's for a mitzvah, that's a different story. Then you can even set sail right before Shabbos. And we had this concept before. You can tell the guy that he should stop, and then he ignores you, but at least you told him. And 2 port cities in Lebanon, Sar and Sidon, which are extremely adjacent to each other, then you can even set sail, because it's really just like taking a car, a wagon. It just happens to be by water, but they're very close. If there's a practice of not setting sail on Erev Shabbos, so then you don't set sail. And we mentioned the last time this came up that this is somewhat related to the Rebbe's campaign of against the Israeli ships. That was an issue in the 60s. Part of the 50s, 60s, part of the issue is that they claimed if you set sail 3 days before Shabbos and then you're stuck on Shabbos, so then maybe it's okay. But the Rebbe said you have alternatives. You don't have to be sailing on Shabbos at all. You can anchor before Shabbos. It was just for financial reasons, different excuses, and this was an issue that not all Rabbanim fully understood or felt exercised about, and the Rebbe made it his personal crusade until, I believe ultimately everyone ultimately agrees that Rebbe was right and the others were wrong, and then the problem itself went away with the ships going out of commercial travel.
Yeah, airplanes took over.
Yeah. So that is that. Now we're reaching the end. So marital relations is also a form of Einik Shabbos. Back to Einik Shabbos. So we know there's oina for different peoples on a different schedule, but for a Talmid Chacham who's healthy, it's every Friday night. And even if a person got married, that's known as Zagan Erev Shabbos, so the first bia is Friday night. We don't have a concern about the chayvel here or about tsar. We disregard that for the sake of this. Final halacha, the siyum of Hilchos Shabbos, halacha Tezvav, and the Rambam switches to discussing about the importance of Shabbos. Shabbos already the Zara. They're both equal to the rest of the Torah. Shabbos Yoish Bein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Uveneinu La'olam, and Shabbos is a sign between Hashem and us forever, like we say in the Psukim. I see. And so if you transgress any other mitzvah, fine, you're wicked. Someone who transgresses Shabbos in public, of course, we mostly mean dafka. Sometimes we say that if you wouldn't be Mechal Shabbos in front of a respectable person, it diminishes. We mean Mechal Shabbos 100% committed to Chil Shabbos. So that's equivalent to serving Avodah Zarah. It's Keneged Kol HaTorah Kul, and they're both treated like Goyim. Pashal Halacha L'maisa. When you want to know what's the din of a mummer, so we talk about Shumad Mamish or Mechal Shabbos for Hasya. Therefore, the Navi praises and says, special praise in Yeshaya for someone who keeps Shabbos properly, someone who keeps Shabbos properly, and honors it and delights in it according to his ability. From a furnish Kabbalah, Yasser al Asachar at Safan La'elam Haba already says in the Psukim and Navi that his schar in Elam Hazeh is even greater than the schar that's waiting from Elam Haba. And there's a whole sikha from the Rebbe on the siyum of Hilchos Shabbos and Kut Sichas Vayetze, Kut Sichas Chelik Lamed Vayetze Aleph. You can look it up. I'm not going to quote it now. Shnamar Oz Tisaneg Al Hashem V'Kavticha B'Masi Aretz V'Achalticha Nachos Yaakov Avicha Kapi Hashem Diber. So this is the reward of your earning Ma'anik Shabbos is Oz Tisaneg Al Hashem.
The Makesha Shaitan was